So I suppose I'd like to ask you, what is the path?
My formulation for what is the path? The path is a process through which one comes to know oneself, and through that, what really is, the world as it is, to know God. That's the goal of the path and the process. And the process is that of putting oneself in a position where one is in harmony with the cosmos, as it were, and practicing the various rites that have been handed down over the generations that are facilitative of that, because they are in harmony with reality. And then beyond that, exploring one's own nature, character, and intuition, so that one can know oneself, and as they say, he who knows himself knows his Lord. Can you add anything to that?
That's very beautiful and very comprehensive. I really liked the terms process and exploration, actually. So these two terms stuck out.
I think those are key terms, because the path requires learning, and that is necessarily a development. And it's not about getting things down, as it were, or learning a particular doctrine and not applying it. It's a process.
And what's fascinating about that is that what I'm hearing is that that the path is a process, and so you mentioned terms and phrases like knowing yourself and knowing God, or rather also knowing reality. It's almost as if process, or the part of the path that is process, is about knowing yourself.
Indeed, it is.
And knowing God is a kind of goal that in some way is superimposed upon the process, almost at every kind of point of this process.
Yes, because that's always the point of the process. And I think perhaps that's often forgotten, that every constituent element of the path serves that goal, to know oneself, so that one might know one's Lord.
It's almost paradoxical, though. It's just because we have a path in regards to a process of knowing ourselves, but yet God is ever present in this path, and we're knowing Him all the same in this process. How do we reconcile that?
Yes, that's because we're not who we think we are. Who we think we are is an illusion. And when we abandon that illusion in the process of the path, when we abandon that illusion, then we know what really is, and that's God, and can only be God, and can only be the thing that one knows.
So part of knowing yourself is actually letting go of everything that you believe that you are.
Probably the biggest roadblock to spiritual understanding in every tradition and in every mysticism is oneself, and the intellectual, historical, cultural, family baggage that one carries, from which and through which one makes assumptions about what's true. But all of the things that are true need to be understood from their point of view, not through this lens that we impose on it, as you said very clearly.
All of this can be pretty jarring, though. Apart from paradox, it can be jarring in the sense that where are our constants? If we're always in the realm of letting go, what's letting go, and who are we in that process?
Well, we are that which we need to let go of, one might say. We are really more of the problem than the answer. And to let go is to let go of the things that hold us back, even though those things are comfortable, usual, sometimes beautiful. But these are things that keep us anchored in the illusion, rather than that which allows us to abandon the illusion in favor of that which is real. Now, yes, there is a contradiction in terms of who abandons this illusion. But finally, the answer is It has to be God who abandons the illusion, because the illusion doesn't exist. And
It was God the whole time.
It was God the whole time. And that's one of the most difficult things for beginners, as you put it, to understand. Here in Islam, the starting point is very clear. La ilaha illallah. There is no divinity but the divinity. There is no anything other than the divinity. And that means that what we think of as ourselves can't be real.
That's very beautiful. But in many ways, especially with the Shahada, La ilaha illallah is out there at the beginning. It's really far.
Yes, that's right. And that, I think, is the way most people need to approach these things. We need to worship a God, the God, our God, the one God, until we come to understand that there isn't anything else.
And so then that worship transforms into a kind of recognition, but it's still a worship, but it's a discovery, I suppose.
It's more of a, let me put it this way, worship is a word that has a lot of baggage to it. Let me put it this way. It's not really worship, but it's the attitude that the part has to the whole.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, that's very beautiful. That's a very beautiful.
Well,
part of the whole. In regard to
all of these forms of worship, in this tradition and others, are really a celebration of that which is, of God, the divinity, as he is, or as she is, depending on where you are in the traditional world.
That's very beautiful. It reminds me of actually a commentator in the Tafsir tradition of Quran who commentated on a particular verse, at the end of the verse being, or the verse being about the reason why human beings and the jinn were created, and the reason being, which is so that they may worship me. And the commentator immediately states that the inner meaning of liya'buduni is liya'rifuni, which means, so to worship me actually means to know me. And that's
yes,
very
exactly. And in that is one of the most subtle and most difficult pieces of metaphysical reality, which is the notion that the one subject is infinite, and infinity necessarily means the possibility of the one subject knowing itself objectively. And that's where we come in, and that's what the worship is.
So the one subject knowing itself as an object that
Yes.
it adores.
Yes, that's right.
And so here's both simultaneously the means and the goal, I guess, of the path.
Very well said. I think that's exactly right. That's how I see it.
Let's use that as a cut for a discussion about the Medini Tariqa. What is the Medini?
How are we doing?
This is beautiful. This is gold. We want to keep this.
Are you comfortable?
Yes, this is great.
This is gold. So we want to keep with this back and forth. So what is the Medini Tariqa, guys?
So we've spoken about the path. So let's speak about specific paths. And in particular, the Maryami Tariqa, the Tariqa al-Maryamiyya. What is the Tariqa al-Maryamiyya?
Well, every tradition has within it a mystical path. And within Buddhism, for example, there is Zen and other treatments of mysticism. Within Christianity, there's the Jesus prayer and hesychasm as it's practiced in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And in Islam, there's Sufism, which is the mystical path that is practiced within the body of Islamic revelation. That has been established since the founding of Islam and handed down over time with very various transitions and various points of departure through various cultures over the time since the revelation. Those instantiations of that process and that method are the various Sufi tariqas, schools that exist. One of them is the Tariqa Maryamiyya, which traces its origin back through Abul Hassan Shadhili, all the way back to Abdul Qadir Jilani, and to the family of the Prophet. And that is the Tariqa Maryamiyya.
As you're speaking, I'm imagining a large tree with a main trunk with many branches, and then from the branches, twigs, and how the branches and even the twigs interact.
It's a very good image, and I think it's an accurate description of the way the various Sufi tariqas have evolved over time. Some of these branches are very different from one another. It's not as if they're all bearing the same kind of fruit, although one could say the sap is the same.
And each branch and even each twig is one with the tree, but is very specific and particular.
Yes, indeed. Yet both are true.
Yeah.
Both are true.
And so, in regards to the specificity of the Tariqa Maryamiyya, can you speak more about the particularity of it?
Well,
what makes it the Tariqa Maryamiyya as compared to, for example, other Alawi branches or Shadhili branches or even Sufi orders?
Well, the defining moment of the Tariqa Maryamiyya was in the life of Sheikh Isa, when he, at one point in one of his journeys, felt that he had been adopted by Sayyidatuna Maryam. So much so that he took her name to establish his branch of the Tariqa. So what we think of as the Maryamiyya Tariqa really goes back to that moment, although the content really has to do with Sheikh Isa and his writings and those around him, those who are known in philosophical circles as the perennialists.
Can you speak more about some of those particularities of Sheikh Isa and how he perhaps adapted what he received from his master, the Sheikh Al-Alawi, and how does that make us who we are?
Well, one of the things that characterizes the Tariqa Maryamiyya is that it's essentially a Western Tariqa. It has its origins in Morocco, but it was really developed through the works and the inspirations of Sheikh Isa in Europe. So it has kind of a Western flavor to it, and its culture has more to do with European culture than it does to do with Near Eastern culture. That being said, there's a certain evident continuity with the Tariqa, with its origins in Morocco and further into the historical reaches of Islam. The Tariqa Maryamiyya, being so Shuonian, might say, it was Frithjof Schuon, Sheikh Isa, who wrote most of the books that established the perspective, and that perspective is universalist and traditionalist. And those 2 points of departure are the characteristics of the Tariqa Maryamiyya.
And as you say that, and specifically speaking from a Western point of view, obviously there's certain needs intellectually, even psychologically, that Western seekers, on the path have always had. That, and in particular, modern Western seekers.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, because, and this is clear in the writings of Sheikh Isa, that Western seekers need different reasons for their own practice. They have different needs for causal information. They have a different kind of cultural matrix in which these things need to fit or be understood. And that can be very different than peoples from other cultures and traditions.
And that makes a lot of sense even in regards to this original analogy of the tree, that a particular branch is facing a particular direction, having particular existential circumstances that another branch on the other side may not have.
Exactly.
And, all of them are obviously participating in the same one.
Yes. And that's one of the things that was emphasized in the works of Sheikh Isa. Specifically in his book, Transcendent Unity of Religion, is that there is, in fact, this one sap to the various branches of the tree, which is sometimes difficult for the branches to understand, since every branch knows it has the sap and can take its origins all the way back to the start. But it is Schuon and his universalist perspective that allows us to see all of the branches as participating in the same sap.
That's very beautiful. It comes back to the imagery that you gave of the part and the whole.
Yes.
But also, it's almost as if this particular branch has a twig that's turning around and kind of viewing the whole tree.
And seeing the tree, yes, exactly. Very good. I like that very much.
I'll use that as a break point.
Good.
We're doing great here. This is gold, by the way.
Really? Are you comfortable?
Can we get into a short discussion where we compare and contrast the direct path and the gradual path?
Without using those terms? I can try that.
We used them before. We used them
never
before.
used it in
All
his
right.
book.
Okay.
That's why I'm interested in getting some of the back and forth between them.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be extensive.
Well,
5 minutes.
do you want me to repeat what I've said before?
Well, I wanted Hassan is going to have his own take on things, so you're going to be it's dialogical in this respect, right?
Okay.
In dialogue, you're responding to another person's objections, another person's specifications. It's different from addressing something just flat out and declaring a position on something. So that's what I wanted to give on camera.
Give us inspiration. Just say the topic, and then we'll go.
How does the gradual path complement the direct path, and how does the direct path complement the gradual?
There's a distinction that's often made between what's called a progressive path and a direct path. And a progressive path tends to be a path that exists within and has historically been defined by one of the world's great religious traditions. And these are part and parcel of that tradition. These offer a time-honored and tested, gradual, structured approach for the traveler to overcome himself and liberate himself from the illusion of separativity. The direct path does not depend on those things, but rather focuses directly on interrogating one's own self and one's experience, so that one can, on the basis of immediate information, directly know that which is true from that which is false. As it turns out, there's a complementarity between the direct path and the structured path. And I really would not want to be without either. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like this term, complementarity here. Because on the one hand, the gradual path, this progressive path almost leads to the insight, that subtle kind of insight that it's always been the one and only the one. And that's what the direct path starts with, is kind of like its starting point.
Right.
But at the same time, in terms of complementarity, the direct path is a path. So a path is a point from one point to the to the next, and so it is a path. So no matter how direct it is, it has to be a path. But its starting point is the end. But it's a path, a kind of circular path that always returns back to its starting point.
Indeed, well said. I'd also like to add that we're kind of in a historical moment where they really need each other, because so much of formal religion has become calcified and seems to have lost touch with the mystical sap that created it.
That's a beautiful.
And on the other hand, there are a lot of ad hoc New Age takes on spirituality that may be idiosyncratic or maybe
and may even sound beautiful, actually.
and may even sound beautiful, but having reference to both allows one to have a operating universe which in one can be confident and still explore the mysteries.
That's very insightful, and I really like this complementarity aspect. Especially in our context, oftentimes, as you've mentioned, the structure of an Orthodox tradition, however beautiful and however preservative, and preserving tends to maintain a rigidity that it's oftentimes hard to get yourself outside of that box.
Yes,
to kind of recognize the space, like the spaceless dimension, of presence, if you will.
Yes, and there's so much time that people spend arguing about the structure or the carapace rather than being involved in the heart, in the sap.
And really, oftentimes, even in New Age places, there's beautiful insights that if one were just able to take those insights and integrate them into a beautiful, protected, preserved, structured path, it would just be the best of both worlds.
Yes, I agree completely. The argument that's often made for a structured path or a traditional path is that it has been tried over decades, if not centuries, and the techniques have been refined, and that's a hedge against the uncertainty of wasting your time and not getting anywhere spiritually and not having any insights and not being liberated.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, that's all true, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And on the other hand, we have this direct path that allows us to engage immediately in an exploration of what's true, but without having a reference to some structure or some philosophy or metaphysic. One can get just lost in the weeds.
And that's an excellent point, because there's something in these direct paths that offer a kind of very fresh insight into the spiritual life that is very timely. We spoke earlier about the needs of the time and the needs of seekers in a particular moment in history, and certainly tradition adapts. But there's something that paths like the direct path offer to that need to actually directly. Mm-hmm. That, in a sense, the direct path could only work now.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I think that's a very good formulation.
Let's go ahead and segue into the themes of meditation. So, I don't know anything about the themes of meditation, so you guys are going to discuss between yourselves what they are, and I'm going to learn from the sideline here.
Before
you start, let me just refresh mine.
You have another sip of tea.
Another sip of tea.
Got a phone call to make sure everything's okay. Right, yeah, we're good.
This is gold material, fellas. I'm super happy with what we're getting. All right.
Hold on.
Ready when the two.
Wait.
Oh, cut out.
This is like content for the whole year. It's great.
I'm happy to and really honored to be a part of this process.
Let's talk about the 6 themes of meditation. I want. This is going to follow perhaps
The other section.
Yeah.
So in regards to we spoke earlier about the particularities of the path, and in particular the Tariqa Mariamia, and Sheikh Isa's inspired adaptation of really Sheikh Al-Alawi's method. Can we speak a little bit more about what Sheikh Isa's method was?
Well, really the great inspiration of Sheikh Isa was the explication of the 6 themes of meditation, in which he defined 3 levels of phenomena and 2 modes, active and passive. And then in each of those fields could describe divine qualities, human qualities, virtues, vices, and so many more things. Stop, I'm not doing very well.
No, you're doing fine. Can you list these 6 themes of meditation?
Yeah, just pick up right where you were.
All right. There are active themes and there are passive themes. All of the odd-numbered themes are passive. The even numbers are active. And the contrast between theme 1 and 2 is that theme 1 is perfection. And it's a hard perfection. It's the quality of diamond. And theme 2 is action. It's the quality of decisiveness. And in 3 and 4, 3 is passive and is the quality of peace. And 4 is active and it's the quality of mercy. Then in theme 5 and theme 6, which have to do with the divine nature, theme 5 is the divine perfection. Only the divine is perfect. And in theme 6, it's the divine subjectivity. All are part of the same unity. Those 6 qualities are explicated in terms of art, in terms of history, in terms of the divine qualities that appear in each of these segments. And the point of these, the use of these, the purpose of these, is that the traveler can use these as transitional tools and as points of meditation. They're called the themes of meditation, to use between the usual distracted consciousness one has throughout life, while moving into the focused concentration of the principal part of the method, which is, of course, the invocation of the divine name, the Dhikr Allah. Those tools, those 6 themes, which provide insight and reference to divine qualities, are very valuable tools for making that transition.
So I'm hearing here that with these 6 things of
Catherine
meditation,
Schwann, his wife,
you have
did this.
qualities that you discussed here, that you spoke about, the divine qualities and even spiritual ones. What's the difference between the 2? In other words, it
Some
almost
of
sounds
these
like
are
there's
just
a
actual
divine
icons.
side of this and there's a human side. How do the 2 relate in the context of the 6 themes of meditation and in the context of the invocation of the Supreme Name?
Because there's a divine quality and a human
Him as a boy. Schwann is
much as there's a divine quality of beauty and there's a human quality of virtue. And it's that kind of resonance that occurs up and down the chain of creation.
And how do we use this? Because you almost hinted, at the fact that this can be used in our lives, but then also specifically in the context of the invocation of the Supreme Name. How do we use the themes of meditation?
Because the use of the themes of meditation allows us to focus on, recall, and to some degree steep ourselves in these divine qualities, which we then can look around and find everywhere in existence if we keep our eyes open. So it brings these qualities, which seem to be conceptual, directly into our experience so that we can taste them. It is often said that Sufism is about tasting. All mysticism is about tasting. This is a way to taste.
Experiential knowing.
Experiential knowing.
That's very beautiful.
It's a good description of tasting.
Yes.
Experiential knowing.
I've heard Sheikh Hussein, say that Sheikh Abu Bakr, Martin Lings, once very beautifully stated that the themes of meditation, should be used all the time, except when you're invoking a Supreme Name.
That's right.
Can you speak more about that?
That's right. Because in our practice, the invocation of the divine name doesn't need any help.
That was
It doesn't need
Sheikh Ahmed
any
Alawi,
activities
Schwann's
to go with
master.
it. and is in and of itself
Algeria.
sufficient. The themes of meditation can introduce that or motivate that, and I think Sheikh Issa used
A
both
very good book on
terms.
Buddhism.
But if they're not to be carried into the invocation, which is about invoking the name of God and only about invoking the name of God, Sheikh Issa also described it this way, that as you dive into the great ocean of the invocation, the last thing you see on the surface is the themes.
That's beautiful. Like that
That's his
image, like that's a beautiful image. Like that image resonates a lot with me. And what I like about it is that it reminds me of the title of one of Sheikh Issa's texts in some interesting way. The text is called, or is entitled, Presence and Making the Present.
That was
Being present and making present.
Yes, yes.
Rene Guénon.
And so there's something about what you just said in regards to contemplating the themes of meditation, in regards to making ourselves present for the presence in the name.
Some of these are not related pictures.
With the name in the invocation.
Exactly. That's a very good description of it. Alhamdulillah.
All right, let's use that. We're doing great. We're almost